Hello and welcome back. My name's Louise, if you're new here, if you haven't watched my videos before. I make videos all about books and all about sustainable happiness, which is the umbrella term that I use to talk about how you can live a life that serves both you and the planet as best as possible. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. In today's video, I want to specifically talk about veganism and eating a plant-based diet, because as I continue to learn about sustainability, I realise that this is a topic that we cannot talk about enough. Like, this is a topic that is so important that we need to keep talking about it and keep being honest and open and vulnerable about it. And it's been a while since I made a video directly addressing the topic of veganism. I made a video reviewing Ed Winter's new book, which I would highly recommend if you want to learn more about veganism. But it's been a while since I shared a video talking honestly and openly about my current thoughts and beliefs, and so I figured it was time to do that. I have been plant-based for about 2.5 years now, since I, dramatically cut down how many animal products I was eating. And in that time, I've done a lot of thinking and I've come to various conclusions, and I wanted to share with you my logic as it sits in my brain at the moment. And what I've realised through all the various things I've read and my current beliefs is that there are 3 reasons why you should eat a plant-based diet. And then there's 1 reason why I don't think you need to be vegan. And that is controversial, but we're going to talk about it. So let's start with the 3 reasons why I eat a plant-based diet and why I think eating a plant-based diet is so important in our current age, and why I advocate for it and why I think more people should be eating a plant-based diet. So the first one, and in my opinion the most important one, and the reason why I decided to significantly reduce how many animal products I was consuming, is the planet and sustainability. Because currently, the way that we farm animals is just unsustainable. Like, just full stop. We can't keep producing animal products in the way that we do. In the Western world that we live in, we have come to this point where we have decided that every person who exists is entitled to eat animal products multiple times a day. And in order to keep up with that demand, we are farming animals like there's no tomorrow. Jonathan Safran Foer has written about this really well in both of his books on veganism. He describes it as this idea that we have turned the world into an animal agriculture factory. And that is not what the world is meant to be. So much of the world's land is used for growing crops for animals and for grazing different animals. And it's having a hugely devastating impact on our planet. There are multiple studies that show that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. And we all know how bad climate change is. I don't think many people are denying that these days. And animal agriculture is the leading cause, according to many different sources. And as Jonathan Safran Foer talks about, it's also the cause that we have the most immediate control over. So even if you don't believe that it's the leading cause, even though it is, it's probably the cause that you have the most influence over. Because while it's hard for someone as an individual to change, the oil industry, it's very easy to change what's on your plate. And so it's just got to the point where I couldn't in good faith continue eating animals, knowing that that was destroying the planet. It really is as simple as that. There are lots of different stats I could give you that would shock you, I'm sure, but I know that stats are always a difficult thing because it's so hard to quantify these things, and so stats are always brought into question. But there is so much research that shows that the way that we're farming animals just isn't sustainable. And there's also a lot of research that shows that there just is no sustainable way of farming animals, because we have a population of 7 billion human beings, and in order to grow enough animal products to fulfill the wants of 7 billion people, especially given the fact that currently a lot of those people aren't getting their wants met, would like to eat more animal products because they live in developing countries, it's just not possible to do that sustainably. There just is no way. We can't raise cows that are organic, grass-fed, looked after, because there just isn't the space and the resources. And so if we want our planet to keep looking the way it is, we're going to have to change how we eat, because animal agriculture is causing huge amounts of deforestation, huge amounts of climate change, and it just isn't sustainable. And then the second reason why I no longer eat meat is for human beings and for the welfare of human beings across the planet. This is definitely something that I realise and have learnt more about the more I've learnt about sustainability. But essentially, animal agriculture is causing huge global inequalities because, as I said, we are destroying the planet, and a big part of the issue with that is that it will impact people disproportionately, and people in developing countries who have contributed the least to climate change are the people who are going to see the biggest impact. And so by me choosing to eat animal products, I would be choosing to contribute to global inequalities. And that's not right. And then the second major point in this argument about human beings is this idea that we grow enough food on the planet to feed everyone, to feed all 7 billion people that exist today. But currently, many people starve because the way that we farm is really inefficient. So if we all ate like the soy crops that we grew, we would be able to feed enough people. Like, we grow enough calories on the earth every year in plants to feed 7 billion people. They're like 2,000 calories a day. Like, we can do that. But the issue is that we want to eat animals, and what we have to do instead is we feed loads of soy to a cow, and then the cow produces beef. But the thing is, a cow is not a beef producing machine. Like, a cow's body is not designed to produce beef efficiently. A cow's body is designed to stay alive and to reproduce more cows. Like, that's what the cow's body is designed for. The cow's body is not designed to be a beef machine. And so it's a really inefficient beef machine. And so we have to feed lots of soy to a cow in order to get out a small amount of steak. And therefore, people are starving in the world because we are choosing to use the crops that we have in a really inefficient way to provide food for the country. And there's more and more reasons that go on. There's like subsidies, funding, the way that the food systems work in the world, which, to be honest, I don't know enough about to talk about really. But it's very clear to me that animal agriculture is causing really bad global inequalities, especially when it comes to food. And then also, while we're on the topic of human beings, the other thing that obviously needs to be mentioned is the conditions of the workers in the animal agriculture system. So obviously there are some examples where farmers are really well off and really love their jobs, but there are also countless instances throughout the world where people are being abused and mistreated in the name of animal agriculture, like slave workers, essentially. Fishing is really bad for human slavery and human trafficking, but it exists across the animal agriculture industry, like across various sectors of the industry. And obviously one of the worst things is slaughterhouses. People have to work in, like, if we want to eat animals, people have to work in slaughterhouses and slaughter these animals. And it's harrowing working in a slaughterhouse. I say that as if I have experience. I don't, but I believe people, and I believe the accounts I've read and the things I've seen, like the documentaries I've seen and the accounts I've read from people who work in slaughterhouses and people who investigate slaughterhouses, and it sounds awful. And I would not wish it upon anyone. Or we shouldn't be putting anyone through that. No one should have to slaughter animals on a daily basis. It's been shown to cause like trauma and PTSD, and it sounds absolutely awful. And I don't want anyone to have to do that just for me to be able to eat a steak. So for that reason, there's another reason why, for the sake of human beings and, you know, global equality and trying to make sure every human being on the planet has the best welfare that they can have, because that's what I, you know, it's like, that's one of my ideals that I try and think about when I'm like, how could the world be a better place? You know, I want everyone to have good welfare. And that doesn't happen. And animal agriculture is a big contributing factor for why that doesn't happen. And so it's another important reason why I think it's important not to eat so many animal products. And then the last reason why I chose to cut down how many animal products I was eating is because of the animals themselves. I didn't go into eating a plant-based diet because of the animals, but the more I read and the more I've seen of documentaries and social media and all of that stuff, the more I've been convinced that eating animals is just ethically wrong. Firstly, because most of the animals that we raise for livestock are kept in awful conditions. And again, is the argument of people who say, oh, well, they should be kept in better conditions, haven't really thought through the fact that we can't do that and still meet the global supply. And also it would cost a lot more money. And would you be willing to pay that much more for your meat products? The average person wouldn't be, I don't think. And secondly, because there just is no ethical way to keep prisoner and then slaughter an animal. It's just not possible. Ed Winters talks about this really well, but he talks about the idea that, like, you know, the baseline is there is no ethical way to slaughter an animal. To kill an animal that doesn't want to die is wrong. And there's no way of justifying that by saying, oh, but it had a really nice life. You know, like if we use the argument when it came to like humans or dogs, we would see that was really wrong. And so why do we use that argument when it comes to pigs and cows? A lot of vegans talk about this idea of carnism, which is to do with the fact that we've been brought up and we're surrounded by this culture in which eating animals is so normalised that we're just completely desensitized to it. Because when we think about the idea of like killing a human being or like killing a cat or a dog, most people are repulsed by that idea and find that, you know, completely offensive and unacceptable. And yet when we think about killing a pig or a cat or a cow or, you know, a lamb, that makes sense to us. And people are like, why is that the case? Because there's nothing in our biology that says we should be repulsed by someone killing a dog and not repulsed by someone killing a pig. And so they refer to it as this idea of carnism, because it's just something that we've been brought up with in our culture, and something that's been really impactful for me is to try and undo that thinking. We're surrounded by so much media that tells us that eating animal products is okay, that I think when you're trying not to eat animal products, it's important to combat that by choosing to surround yourself with media that says it's not okay to eat animals. Because I think one of the big reasons why a lot of people will watch a documentary like Cowspiracy and then become vegetarian for a couple of months and then fall off of that and go back to eating animal products is because they saw this really powerful vegan documentary, were really moved by it and wanted to make changes in their life, but then they went back to being surrounded by all this media that says eating animals is right and normal and okay. And so they lost that motivation, I guess, or those ideas that they were shown in that documentary. And so that's why I think it's really important to flood yourself with vegan propaganda, essentially. So I would really recommend following Ed Winters on all various platforms. He makes really good bite-sized snippets on social media about veganism and different reasons for veganism. Would really recommend his book, and as I said, Jonathan Safran Foer's 2 books. But also, I would really recommend following animal sanctuaries on Instagram. I follow Surge Sanctuary, which is part of Surge is a really great vegan organisation. Partly, I think Ed Winters is one of like the founders of it. But they have a sanctuary, and then there's one in Australia that I really love called Edgar's Mission. Those are the main 2 ones that I follow. But just following these sanctuaries on Instagram, and every day I see these really adorable little lambs or little pigs running around, and both of those sanctuaries do a really good job of making posts about, you know, reminding you that like these animals aren't meat. Look how fun and friendly they are. Look how much they have individual personalities. And like I'm now really attached to individual animals from these sanctuaries. Like there's this pig called Nigel that is adorable. And seeing that on a daily basis helps to I guess resensitize me to animals. You know, we've been desensitized for so long that we need to resensitize ourselves to animals, and that helps me to now, like when I go in a supermarket and I look at the meat aisle, I feel kind of repulsed. And I think normalizing animals in my head has really helped with that. So those are my reasons for why I eat a plant-based diet. And as you can see, each of those reasons is huge and so important, and why eating a predominantly plant-based diet has become so important to me. But the reality is that my diet is not 100% plant-based. I do still eat the occasional animal product. And I want to talk about why, because it's a very controversial thing, because a lot of people who label themselves as vegan are very, we often use the word like staunch vegans, and a lot of people see vegan as this like moral imperative, and they're like, you're either vegan or you're not. Whereas I like to refer to veganism as like an ideology that I'm like aspiring towards, rather than a standard or a box that I either am in or I'm not in. So technically, you know, my diet is plant-based, I would say, because it is like 90% plants and only like 10% animal products, if that. So I guess plant-based would be the word that makes the most sense. I normally tell people that I'm vegetarian because that's the simplest way to describe it. Like if someone handed me a plate of meat, I would refuse it. But if someone handed me a plate of dairy, I don't know why you should just hand me like a plate of cheese or something, I would probably eat it at this stage in my journey towards eating a plant-based diet. I'm not repulsed by the idea of eating cheese and things, so I tend to just tell people I'm vegetarian. But essentially, cutting to the chase, the reason why my diet is not 100% vegan is because being human is already difficult enough, and that, in my opinion, makes it okay. to not be 100% vegan. The human condition and being alive is freaking difficult, man. And that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, and that doesn't mean life isn't beautiful, but sometimes being alive is really freaking hard. I have struggled with anxiety for essentially my whole life. So I know how difficult and scary being alive can be. And giving yourself another thing to worry about is really difficult. And so for me, what I found is that I am able to cook myself vegan meals pretty easily. So most of the meals that I cook for myself for like breakfast, lunch and dinner in my own house are vegan or are like 95% plant-based. Like they really are most of the time fully plant-based, and if not, there's maybe like one ingredient in them that isn't. But the circumstances where I really struggle are firstly snacks, because as someone who struggles with anxiety, I comfort eat a lot, and I have just for the last 5 or 6 years relied on snacks for comfort, which is bad, I know, but vegan snacks just don't cut it sometimes. And it's something I've thought a lot about, and I'm trying to get better at it, but I do still occasionally eat chocolate and things that have cheese in them because they're tasty, and sometimes I've had a really long day and all I want is a bar of dairy milk, and I've tried to fight that before and it just hasn't worked. I always end up caving and buying the dairy milk, so I've decided that I'm just not gonna worry about it too much. You know, I try not to do it too often, but when it does happen, I'm not going to beat myself up for it. And similarly, a lot of convenience foods, if you want to buy like a ready meal or something, that often has milk powder in it. Or I do sometimes eat things like rennet and gelatin, which technically I know are not vegetarian, but again are often lurking in products, and so I do still occasionally eat those, and which is why technically I couldn't call myself vegetarian, but that's just what I tell most people. But like those foods are sometimes lurking in things, and then I found going out to eat. I'm very lucky that I live in Bristol, which is a very progressive vegan green city. And so there are lots of restaurants with good vegan options, but that's not always the case, especially when I go out to dinner with friends and family, like if they're choosing where we go. Because obviously if I'm choosing the restaurant that we'll go to, I'll pick somewhere that I know has good vegan options, but that's not always possible. And so often I end up eating a vegetarian meal when I go out for meals. And then also just living with other people. I currently live in a house share with 4 other people, and we cook together sometimes, or sometimes I'm just using an ingredient that's already in the fridge that contains animal products, or, you know, if my family are cooking for me. They have been very understanding on the whole, but occasionally, you know, they'll give me something that has some cheese in it or something like that. And it's something I've discussed at length with them and like we have an open dialogue about, but my diet is not perfectly 100% vegan. And as I say, I think it's okay because it would be really difficult, I think, to make my diet 100% vegan. What I've noticed is that I think it's very doable for the average person to have a diet that is 80-90% plant-based. That feels very doable to me, in my experience, from what I've learned. Yes, you will have to learn some new recipes, but that's really not that difficult. It's really easy to cook delicious, nutritious meals that are vegan. The other areas are where I found it's difficult. You know, it's the snacks, it's going out for food, it's when other people are cooking for you. That's when I found it's really difficult. And so sort of the peace that I've made with it is that I'm just going to be 90% plant-based for the time being while the world is in the state that it's in. I would love in 20 years' time for veganism to be so normalised and so accepted that I don't have those issues anymore, that I can go into the supermarket and there are aisles full of vegan snacks, and I can go to restaurants and there's always multiple delicious vegan options on the menu. You know, I would love that. And if that happens, amazing, and I won't shy away from that. I think that's what we should be working towards as a culture. But currently that isn't the case, and I don't think it's right for us as individuals to beat up ourselves or other individuals for not being 100% vegan when, as I say, being alive is already so difficult without having to worry that your diet is 100% vegan or not. Another reason why I do this is because I have realised throughout the last few years of trying to live sustainably that I can have a bigger impact by trying to minimise my footprint in various areas of like the sustainability pie to, you know, being like 80-90% sustainable, rather than trying to reduce one slice of the pie to being 100% sustainable. Does that make sense? So like if the various slices of the pie are like eating a plant-based diet, never travelling by plane and like travelling sustainably, being zero waste, advocating and educating and all these different things, I've found that it's more effective to aim for like 80 to 90% in each of those areas rather than aiming for 100% in one area, because that's how like the curve of learning works. You know, as I say, in order to be 80% vegan is very doable, I think, and I really think the average person could quite easily do that. But in order to be 100%, you would have to like educate yourself, you'd have to do probably lots of meal prepping and lots of meal planning, you'd have to like read the back of every single thing, you'd have to like check restaurants before you went to them, you'd have to like say no to going out to meals with your family and friends, and it would require so much more effort and mental effort, like both physical and mental effort, that you could be putting into other things and therefore having a bigger impact. So I think I've rambled enough to you, but I hope what I was saying made sense, because I just really wanted to share with you where I'm at currently in my plant-based diet. Like I say, I would love to live in a world where being vegan is easy, and if one day we get to that point, I will happily be 100% vegan. But until we get to that point, I have made peace with eating a diet that is 90% plant-based, because I think that's the most realistic and sensible option for me at the moment. And that is what I advocate for. And that is what I would love for you, and what I would love for the people in my life to do. And that's kind of what I promote and share, because I think that is the most sensible option for the immediate future. Because as that quote says, we don't need one person doing it perfectly, we need everyone doing it imperfectly. So, without further ado, I'm going to leave this here. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and you can find me on Instagram and YouTube at Louise Does Life. Thank you for watching.